Welcome to the Rebellion Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Barton. Today we'll be talking with Stefan Rzadzinski, a young Canadian racer tearing up the track in his Porsche GT3. One of Rebellion's founders, Neil Braun, is a huge race fan and a gearhead, and he wanted to figure out how we could sponsor a driver he believes in and shared the values of Rebellion Brewing. In that racer, he found Stefan. Stefan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Excited to work with Rebellion Brewing. It's a cool kind of story. Just as you mentioned, meeting Neil. I met Neil last year. Turns out we had a lot of shared values, and again, like you said, he's a big motorsports guy. Really getting into it a lot. So it was a cool connection.
So I'm going to explain to our audience a little bit here. We're doing a little bit different, calling in on Skype instead of meeting in the office, because you're in Alberta right now.
I'm in actually British Columbia. I am at the racetrack called Area 27 out near Oliver, BC.
Oh, my mistake, BC.
Yeah.
But still lots of good craft beer.
Yes.
Today I wanted to start off with the Flat Cap Stout. Have you had this from ToolShed?
I have not had this one yet. I've heard about it, but I've not had a chance to try it yet.
All right. Well, let me give you a little bit of information about ToolShed. They're based in Calgary, Alberta. I love their story. They literally started in the guy's backyard in a tool shed with a tiny little system, and in only a few years, they've grown leaps and bounds. They're brewing tons of new beer, and it's really exciting to see them grow. They're kind of similar to Rebellion in that sense. One of the cool things is we recently hosted Jeff and Lisa from ToolShed at the Cask Festival. They brought a cask of whiskey-soaked cherry. It was stout, which is my favorite. Super creamy, rich, delicious. Just couldn't get enough of it. But the beer I wanted to talk about today was the Flat Cap Stout. It's I would call it an approachable everyday stout. It's very laid back in its roasted character, not super bitter. Big frothy head. To be honest, I've actually had creamier, sweeter, roastier stouts, and I've even had drier stouts. This one doesn't really lean into any of those individual things on its own. It's very laid back, very balanced. It's not what I would say. What I prefer is maybe something a little bit thicker or sweeter. This is a very nice one. I would drink it for breakfast.
It does sound like a good beer. I mean, we're recording here. It's about lunchtime, so maybe time for the afternoon beer for me here. But that sounds awesome. I'll be interested to try it.
My homework assignment for you is to go grab yourself a Flat Cap Stout.
Yes, I shall try and find that. If I don't find it out here in BC, I'll make sure to get it next time I'm in Alberta or Saskatchewan.
So let's talk about your racing, man. Let's talk about you. How did you get started?
Started with a go-kart with my dad that we borrowed from a friend of his when I was 8 years old. So started racing go-karts when I was 8 years old. And just really progressed from there. Did a lot of local racing for a number of years, just trying to gather the skills and learn the things you need to kind of become a racing driver. And from there, moved on into race cars when I was 16 years old. And I'm 25 now, so I guess I've been in race cars for almost 10 years now, which is pretty incredible for me to think back on. But I mean, it was a long journey. It was a big push and something, I don't think, obviously I dreamed about it since I was a little kid, becoming a race car driver, but to actually see where I've come from and I guess what I'm doing now and I guess the ambition I still have to do more, it's a cool story. It's a cool thing to be a part of, and I'm really lucky to be able to still do this.
You talk about how it's such hard work. What kind of hard work goes into getting a car on the track?
Right, so I think something that a lot of people maybe don't realize is that I don't own any race cars. I don't have a race team. I don't have anything like that. As a race driver, at least in my position, I'm pushing to compete at the top level in motorsports. So, my dream one day is to compete for a world championship, wherever that might be. But on the ladder, on the way up, there's no real straight path. And if you don't have the funds to kind of go through the steps, because it's like going to a very expensive university sometimes, motorsports. The costs are super high. I've never had a family with a lot of funding or a lot of money to put into it. So
what does it cost to get a set of wheels on the road?
A set of tires is about $3,500 Canadian in the series I'm in this year, but to run the full season, the full season is probably worth between three and $500,000 Canadian. It's a lot just in costs to get the car on the track. So I mean, you're not making any money doing that. So putting together the deals or being hired by teams, it's really tough. And a lot of times in this day and age, you're working with teams to try and find a little bit of sponsorship to get the car on track. They're working on the same thing, so there's a lot of moving pieces to try and get the opportunity to just get on the grid. So even just getting on the grid, there's so much more to it than meets the eye, and that's really where 90% of the work is. The racetrack almost becomes the bonus, which is backwards to a lot of people, but it's the reality.
So you got to hustle before you can even hit on the track.
Yeah, I would be sitting at home in Edmonton, not sitting out at a racetrack right now if I didn't do a lot of work beforehand. So, and in the rebellion story, it sounds like a lot of similar types of risk taking, betting on yourself, and just kind of going maybe against the grain, which I would say certainly in my career it's gone that way.
Well, you were saying previously we were talking about how sponsorship rules have changed. That means a change in attitude for drivers, a change in how you do business as a driver. Can you kind of give me some background on how sponsorship used to work?
Yeah, I think back in the day, I mean, the big thing that funded it, especially in Canada when I was young, was tobacco sponsorship, alcohol sponsorships. I think primarily in tobacco was the biggest supporter of motorsports in the country. So they funded a lot of young drivers, a lot of talented young guys who maybe didn't have the funds to do it, and they pushed them all the way to the top level with the right training, development, the proper teams, and everything. Since that's dried up, I guess the government kind of got involved. They weren't allowed to be involved in motorsports events anymore, so that money kind of faded away, um, which made it really tough because then you become, unless you had the funds, you know, from your family a lot of times or close friends, it became really difficult to try and get the funds to actually try and accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. So I think drivers almost turned almost into more entrepreneurs than they did drivers at some point. And I can relate to that. You're just trying to do anything you can to get people excited, to get people involved, and it's hard, but there's of course there's nothing else I'd rather be doing.
So you're rebelling against the status quo.
Yeah, 100%. I think especially in my even in the racing world, when I was younger, I was always struggling to be there, but I think that the tables may have turned at this point. I'm a little bit older now, so all that work I put in the early years, where maybe other drivers had more funding, whether it was from family or whatever, maybe some of that's dried out, but they never learned the skills to kind of put themselves out there and try and find the sponsorships and talk to everybody. Those were the things I was always doing. So I'm still around, and I guess a lot of the people I've raced against kind of maybe faded away or have stopped by now. So I guess I'm thankful for it because I couldn't have done it any other way.
Survival of the fittest.
Yep, just I think the biggest thing is just not willing to quit and just keeping fighting for it. Honestly, it might sound so cliche, but just trying to put yourself in positions where you might get an opportunity, you might get a look here or there, and so far that's paid huge dividends for me.
Well, I don't want you to give away all your secrets, but what are some of the ways you've adapted compared to the other drivers?
I think for me it was always just I didn't have a choice. When I was a kid, I remember I was 8 years old, and yeah, my dad he found me playing my buddy's Game Boy when I was 8 years old, first year go karting. And it was the night before a race, and I wasn't allowed to have video games. And he told me, "All right, we're not racing tomorrow." So, and that devastated me. I know he probably doesn't remember that lesson he taught me, but it devastated me. And it was just really it hammered home the fact that even at that age, it was never. I mean, it was for fun, but it was always a bit more serious. If I wanted to just play around, it was I could easily play soccer, which I did. I grew up and still love playing soccer, or do other things. But it was always a little bit more serious always. So if I wanted to pursue it, I think I was really lucky. My parents pushed me. I mean, they didn't have an option, but they pushed me really to go and fight for it. So I remember being 15 years old, sending thousands of emails to people I didn't know, trying to see who would sponsor me, and I got one or two sponsors out of it, and it helped get the ball rolling. And it's just that consistent effort that I think has kept me going and hasn't let me stop. So certainly no magic to anything I've done. It's just a matter of reaching out.
Well, weren't you in a big contest last year?
Yeah, so last year was probably maybe my biggest breakthrough moment in terms of in the public eye. I was in a Facebook vote against an IndyCar driver and a number of other journalists who were selected. One person would win a chance to race at the Race of Champions, which is essentially the all-star game for motorsports, all the best drivers from around the world. Motorsports has different elements, right? It's got rally, it's got NASCAR, it's got IndyCar, Formula One, sports car racing, huge world. There's racing that goes on anywhere, so it's not like the NHL where all the best players are here and they play in the All-Star games. They bring all these drivers in. I had to go get votes in 4.5 days, and we raised 9,300 individual votes in just over 4 days. So that was 4.5 days, no sleep, no no rest for sure. But we engaged a lot of people. A lot of people got excited, and I think they saw the opportunity for me. My phone broke because I texted so many people. If you were in my phone, you got a text message from me, even if you didn't talk to me anymore, even if you were an ex-girlfriend, I didn't care. I was saying, I need your help, and I need you to tell your brother, sister, family, friends, anybody. And it really worked for me. It was a huge grassroots effort, and I got there. And yeah, we won 2 of my 3 races against some of the best in the world. So I'm really proud of that.
So we're talking about racing. We're talking about how people can support you. How can rebels get in there and support you in your dream?
Honestly, I think at this point the biggest thing is just trying to get attention on the sport. I know I'm in a niche sport. I know there's a snobbery, maybe a high society to motorsports, which I definitely didn't grow up with in any sense. I'm just kind of this. I still think of myself as a kid, just trying to see how far I can take this crazy dream. So I mean, if people want to follow along, that'd be fantastic. I mean, my Instagram, my Twitter, my Facebook, any of that stuff. I think just if you're interested in maybe a different story, just follow along. You never know if something catches your eye. You know, if you want to come out to some races, if you're out east and this year in Canada. But I think online, it's the best place where I'm trying to share my story and you know, buy some Rebellion Brewing beer. I know you guys are only Saskatchewan so far, but I think we're gonna we're gonna work on getting some stuff out there at some point.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, I want to invite the audience to join us next time when we'll be talking with Shadi Musla. He's one of the smartest guys I've ever met. He's the author of a craft beer economic impact report titled Masters of Their Craft. Kind of explains what's happening in Regina and area in the craft beer scene. He's also a trained sommelier and has an amazing palate, which means I love hearing his opinion about trying new beers. If you want to find the latest news about Rebellion Brewing, be sure to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Untappd. Thank you for joining the Rebellion. And thank you, Stefan.
Thanks so much, dude.
Oh, come on,